The war on drugs. The words are such an empty cliche, even if the victims of the drug trade are real enough. Nick Clegg, the Deputy Prime Minister, says he wants a royal commission to rethink the way drugs policy works. David Cameron's ruled it out. It's not perhaps surprising that the two men disagree, but it is as plain as the nose on your face that drug use is widespread and that the illegality of drugs makes an immediate criminal connection and that drug habits drive crime. Might it be time for a new approach? Steve Smith reports.
Oh, the weather outside is frightful, but the fire is so delightful. And since we've no place to go, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow.
Well, the equivalent of the factory hooter's just gone off here in the square mile, and people are taking to the pubs and clubs and restaurants to toast their bonuses, if any. But will they be celebrating only with the finest wines available to humanity? Or might there be other recreational substances available too?
Many of them in London take drugs. Many of them take cocaine specifically because you get the buzz of the trading floor, you get, it's glamorous, exclusive, expensive. It is the perfect drug for city boys, and many of my colleagues and clients used to indulge. It really is as simple as that.
No one has a crystal ball on this, but the Deputy PM says we can't go on as we are.
If you were conducting a war in which there were 2,000 fatalities every year, in which your enemy was getting richer all the time, in which they were throwing new weapons at you, we're now getting 40 to 50 new legal highs introduced into this country every single year, and in which younger and younger children are being affected. If that was a war, if that really was a war, I think we would immediately say, look, we've got to try and do something differently to wage this war more effectively.
But hang on a minute, the most recent figures actually show use of drugs is at its lowest level since 1996. Use of Class A drugs has fluctuated over this time, but has fallen since 2008.
We've seen the gradual use of drugs like cannabis and to a degree ecstasy. Those have been steadily going down. And I think there's pretty good evidence from the crime survey for England and Wales of that. We've seen, I think, with cocaine and with crack cocaine and with heroin, it's gone down very slightly. It's probably the best to say that it's plateaued.
Cannabis, a Class B substance, remains the drug taker's top choice, followed by Class A's, cocaine and ecstasy. Next most common are amyl nitrate, amphetamines and ketamine.
I think pretty much every pub and bar I've ever been into, if you look on the cistern of the toilet, you'll find white crumbs of cocaine. And that doesn't matter whether it's pubs that are populated by plumbers and electricians or ones that are populated by city boys, lawyers and solicitors. I mean, it's everywhere in London, it really is. And when people talk about a war on drugs, it's a war that was lost about 15 years ago, as far as I'm concerned.
Nick Clegg is sending an emissary from London to investigate drug policies elsewhere. What might his wise man discover?
In Portugal, they steer people through what they call dissuasion committees, where they might be steered into treatment or given a sort of little bit of a smack on the wrist and sent to an education class or stuff like that. In Australia, they turn a blind eye and allow a certain amount of cannabis for possession. And there's all these, there's a variation of these, but I think the important point is all of these countries, things have not got dramatically worse.
That's great, but guess what the PM won't be giving Mr Clegg for Christmas? A Royal Commission on Drugs.
Of course, the Deputy Prime Minister is entirely entitled to take a view for the next election and beyond for his manifesto, wanting to go further, wanting to have a Royal Commission. I personally don't support a Royal Commission. In my view, there's always a danger, if someone said, that they can take minutes and last for years. So I'm very happy to debate and discuss drug policy. I think the coalition government has taken a series of good steps.
Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow.
Well, Julia Manning is a health campaigner and the chief executive of the think tank 2020 Health. John Strang is a clinical psychiatrist who specialises in addiction and worked with the UK Drug Policy Commission. And Elliot Albers has used drugs, including heroin and cocaine, for about 25 years. What do you use now, Elliot?
I'm prescribed injectable morphine.
So I think you've answered my next question, which is going to be how you pay for it. We pay for it, the taxpayer pays for it.
Well, indeed, yes.
And you can function.
I function very well. I was a daily heroin user when doing my PhD and when teaching university.
Are you working now?
Yes, I'm the executive director of the International Network of People Who Use Drugs. I've just come back from UNAIDS PCB, where I was arguing for rational drugs policy with the UNAIDS and member states.
And are there lots of people like you who are regular drug users?
Yes, there are countless thousands of people whose drug use is functional and who, because of the stigma and discrimination and criminalisation that they face, cannot possibly come out in public and admit to the fact that they use drugs that are currently legal, but do so in a perfectly functional way.
What do you make of that position?
Well, I think it's unsustainable. It was interesting in the video that we heard Nick Clegg talking about why he's talking about this today, that the drugs policy isn't working. Yet we then saw stats to show that he's actually 10 years out of date. Our laws are working. The use, he particularly focused on children, school children and their drug use. Their use has gone down by 30% in the past 10 years.
This raises the question, which we all need to engage with, which is, what is the aim of drugs policy, Professor?
Drug policy really ought to be towards the public good. It should be to do with reducing the collective harm we have in society.
But look, you've just heard somebody say, we'll leave aside our feelings about whether we should be paying for your drugs, but there's somebody who can function perfectly well. Where's the gain in stopping him using them?
Part of the problem that we have, which makes it a difficult topic for the general public and for politicians, is that use of drugs is associated with harm for many individuals. It's a harm that we would want to avoid, but also our sanctions also bring their own collateral damage and complicate it. So one's looking really for whatever incremental change you can make that reduces the harm overall.
Do you share that view of what the objective of drugs policy ought to be?
Well, every law is about balancing freedom and risk. And to date, we have felt that the risk of drug taking, outweighs our freedoms to be able to do, what we want and take whatever drugs we want. And that, it's not just about the science; it's about, the society. It's about what's in the national interest, and that is outweighed. The risks are too great. And I would actually dispute that, you're still, functioning normally. I'm afraid the medical evidence is that your blood vessels are shrinking by the month, by the year. You will not be able to sustain having morphine injections, until you're old. You won't get to old age.
How old are you?
I'm 43 years old. I've been using heroin for 25 years. And as you probably know, if you do know the evidence, opiates are actually a very safe substance to use. And the only risk associated is overdose.
You feel well, do you?
I'm extremely well. As I said, I was doing my PhD whilst a daily heroin user, teaching at university.
Also, people sleep their way through PhDs.
But indeed they do, Jeremy. But however, when I was teaching, when I was working, nobody ever knew that I was a daily heroin user, so it clearly didn't affect my ability to function at a high level.
Okay, well, let's look. If the idea is to minimise harm, that's the objective, the minimising harm, and there are various ways that might be done. Is harm being minimised currently by keeping them illegal?
I mean, in a way, that the missing ingredient from the way we tackle this problem is that we don't test that. What we have is political and public posturing. We have people coming on your programme and others campaigning or lobbying, and what you really want to do is make small incremental changes, as you would do in the treatment if you want to know whether you get improved treatment with cancer survival rates or any other disorder like that. You expect to see small incremental change, and you want to check, does that improve the situation or worsen it? So in a way, what's missing is the commitment to science.
I think what you're saying is the very worst people to make drugs policy are politicians.
I think there's an inherent problem in the position that politicians have, because they necessarily want to do what is popular. And what I want politicians to do is to look at the evidence and do what is most effective.
What would you change about the way drugs policy works now?
I would want to look at the way that we deal with so-called legal highs. I think the law cannot keep up. They're coming on the market. The film said one new one every year. I think it's more frequent than that. So, and can't possibly keep up. I think we need to look at them in the same way that we do with prescription drugs. If they've got a licence, then they're legal. If they haven't got a licence and they're not prescribed, then they're illegal. It doesn't matter what they're called or what the new formulation is. So that's one thing. The other thing I'd like to see is a seriously look at the drug problem in prisons, because that is out of control. That bit isn't working. And I take your point. We should be looking at what we can change there to improve outcomes for prisoners.
Well, that is that we have a lunatic penal system in which people go in clean and come out addicted.
Yeah.
And that is to do with the way the prisons are run as much as anything. But is there some deep social problem in this country that leads to greater drug use? I mean, why did you start doing it?
It was purely a choice that I chose to make out of intellectual curiosity and interest, and something that I found to be enjoyable and sociable.
But you know that there are plenty of other people who've taken heroin, crack cocaine and various other drugs and are not here to tell the tale. You're very blasé about it.
No, this is not about me as a person, as an individual. The fact is that we have an enormous number of people who use drugs, who have a large range of social problems, whether they be lack of housing, lack of employment, lack of education, and in addition drug use. What tends to happen is that we identify drug use as being the sole causative factor of the problems that they have, when in fact we're dealing with a very complex social mix. And criminalising people and subjecting them to stigma is increasing the problems.
It's very difficult when there's such a broad span of people who use drugs. I mean, the sort of evidence that Steve Smith was citing in his piece, people go clubbing, for example, or they go out on social events. It's a different kind of problem to the sort of problem that you've identified here of people who are, socially disadvantaged and are using drugs for whatever reason as part of that whole experience of social disadvantage. So it's very hard to have some overarching policy, isn't it?
Well, I think we've got one, which is, using drugs is illegal, and that is an overarching policy. But it's an interesting point, because you already said it's indicative of social dysfunction, of a lack of confidence, of needing that something else that you can't get from yourself. And drugs then, turning to drugs simply causes addiction, causes problems with finance, with crime. We should be looking at why are people turning to drugs in the first place? What is wrong that they feel that is the only solution for them?
David Cameron came up with the old line about royal commissions taking minutes and lasting years. I mean, the other one is they're not so much designed to dig things up as dig them in. Now, would you have a royal commission?
I'm probably not the sort of person who'd say whether a royal commission's the right mechanism or not.
But what
we do want is an open-minded examination of the different options. And I mean, I would differ in the view about I would not want to be encouraging people to use drugs. I would want to have mechanisms that enabled people to get out of the hole that they're in. Some of those would involve meeting people where they are and working with them with their difficulties, rather than just saying they shouldn't do so. And I think the prison example is quite a good one. But I would come back to the science question. I would expect people to tell me whether short sentences or long sentences were more effective, or how much difference did the support after prison make. And those answers would then guide me in how I constructed a more effective response.
What we need to learn from Portugal is that policy was brought in specifically for people who are HIV positive, and the amount of transference of HIV through drug users using syringes. And it wasn't about, going soft on drugs.
And of course, what there is in the Portugal example, while the focus has been on the legal framework, it actually is a shift in the investment from a criminal justice response to actually a health care.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.